Happy New Year, everyone! It's Mrs. Ananacone back with another story time. And I don't know if you made any resolutions this year or if you have any dreams or hopes for the future, but today we're going to be looking at and learning about someone who had a dream and is a hero to a lot of people and who is celebrating a birthday on January 15th. And this person was born on January 15th, 1929. Do you know who this man is? If you guessed Martin Luther King Jr., you're correct, and we're celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day coming up. So I thought that I would talk to you and teach you a little bit about Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a minister and an African-American leader. He believed that everyone should be treated the same and worked for equal rights for all people. And he was recognized as one of the greatest men in history. He worked hard to end segregation and discrimination and try to make America a better place. And the images you just saw were from a book called Love Will See You Through, Martin Luther King Jr.'s 6 Guiding Beliefs as told by his niece, Angela Ferris Watkins, and illustrated by Sally Wern Comport. And it's interesting to see a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from other people. So I have a couple of other sources that I'm going to share with you of people who experienced Dr. King when he was alive. And the first little piece I'm going to share with you is from Vanderbilt University. Dr. King spoke there in 1967, and this is what a student said. Listening to Dr. King speak was a memorable experience. You just walked out of there so mesmerized and inspired that there was hope. It was the first time I had seen him, and it was an overwhelming experience. And this is an image from that day when Dr. King spoke at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee from Strong Inside, the true story of how Perry Wallace broke college basketball's color line by Andrew Moranis. And the images I used to accompany some of that is from a book called I've Seen the Promised Land, The Life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by Walter Dean Myers and illustrated by Leonard Jenkins. And the next place we're going to hear from are women quilters in Alabama. Irene Williams made quilts that carried an uplifting message. I remember when Martin Luther King came down here, she said. It was on a rainy night in February 1965. Dr. King was leading a voting rights campaign in Alabama and stopped to preach at the Pleasant Grove Baptist Church. I opened the door to the church, she said. I was so glad to see the man, and when he stood up and talked, I listened. I didn't miss nothing. Inspired by the huge turnout, Dr. King said, to come here to Gee's Bend and to see you out in large numbers gives me new courage and new determination. I come over here to Gee's Bend to tell you, you are somebody. It made me feel very good, the path he cut for us, she recalled. It was like you walk into a room and ain't no light on, and you turn on a light in the darkness. That's what Dr. King meant to us. He turned on the light for us. And as you heard those words, they were from different quilters, and I showed you different quilts from the book, The Quilts of Gee's Bend by Susan Goldman Rubin. And all of these books are nonfiction books about different things, but all about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his impact. Today I'm going to read you a whole story, Happy Birthday Martin Luther King, and it's by Jean Marzolo and illustrated by J. Brian Pinkney. And the illustrations in this are really neat because they're done in a technique called scratchboard, where J. Brian Pinkney painted his image and then painted over it in black and then scratched out what he wanted you to see. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. His parents loved him very much. Martin Luther King had the same name as his father except for one thing. His father was called Martin Luther King Sr., Martin was called Martin Luther King Jr. Martin went to elementary school, high school, and college in Atlanta. He was a good student. Later, he went to divinity school in Pennsylvania. Martin became a pastor, just like his dad, at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. They were both called Reverend, the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Martin's job as a minister was to help people in need. He visited sick people in the hospital and made them feel better. He asked people not to fight with each other. He said that there were peaceful ways to solve problems. And like his father, Martin led people in prayer and song. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. is famous because he helped our country change some of its laws. A law is like a rule. Once there was a law in some places that said only white people could sit in the front of the bus and that black people had to sit in the back. Martin Luther King said this law needed to be changed. Rosa Parks and other people helped him change it. Now all people can sit in any empty seat they like. Once there were laws in some places that said African Americans could only use certain restaurants and drinking fountains. Martin Luther King and many other people helped change these laws. Now all people can share the same restaurants and drinking fountains. Once there was a law in some places that said black children and white children couldn't go to school together. Martin Luther King and other people, including many very brave children, had this law changed too. Now black children and white children can go to school together. Martin Luther King had a special talent for leadership. When he spoke, people listened. Poor people, rich people, white people, black people, and people from all around the world listened when Martin Luther King spoke. Many helped him work, march, sing, and pray for justice. In the summer of 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave the most famous speech of his life. He gave it outdoors to 250,000 people who had come to Washington, D.C. to ask the president for jobs and freedom for black people. In his speech, Martin Luther King said that he had a dream. His dream was that people everywhere would learn to live together without being mean to one another. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed in 1968. Because he loved poor people so much, he was given a special funeral in Atlanta, Georgia, where he was born. His body was put in a simple farm cart and pulled slowly by 2 mules to a cemetery. Thousands of people walked behind Martin in a sad, loving parade. On his gravestone were carved these beautiful words: "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last." Martin Luther King wanted people to be able to go places together, share food together, and love one another in peace. Because he worked so hard for freedom and helped so many people gain it, we honor him every year on his special day. We call this day Martin Luther King Day, and we say to him, "Happy birthday, Martin Luther King." And that's our story this week. This is an image of the monument to Martin Luther King Jr. in Washington, D.C., and it says, "Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope." And these are more images from Love Will See You Through. And today especially, I feel like we need some hope and some love for solving the problems of getting along together. And these are the 6 guiding beliefs that Martin Luther King practiced and lived by throughout his fight for equality. Have courage, love your enemies, fight the problem, not the person who caused it. When innocent people are hurt, others are inspired to help. Resist violence of any kind, and the universe honors love. And I'm going to leave you with one last quote from Martin Luther King Jr., one of my favorites. He says, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Be loving, take care of each other, and remember that I love you. And if you're inspired to learn more about Martin Luther King Jr., here are some books that you can check out. I Am Martin Luther King Jr., a picture book of Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther King Jr. Day. There are other books, and you can check your local library or contact me for more ideas and suggestions. Take care. Be loving.